Today we will read one of my favorite folk tales from a New York State 5th grade assessment. And this assessment will go along with some multiple choice questions that we will answer after our reading. Now we'll be looking for setting, characterization, and theme throughout this story. In a valley in the Highlands of Scotland, there once lived a young tenant farmer, Gregor, and his widowed mother. Although they had worked hard, they could never accumulate enough money to buy the flock of sheep they longed to have, for their small parcel of land produced only modest amounts of oats and barley. To make matters worse, McTavish, the owner of this and many other crofts, always found reasons not to pay the farmers all they had earned. So here would be our setting. In a valley of Scotland would be our place, and then our time would be once long time ago. So we can tell this is kind of like a fairy tale type setting in the distant past. And a tenant farmer would be someone who lives on the land and then pays rent to the landowner. And Gregor's mother, being a widow, that would mean that Gregor's dad has passed away. So Gregor's mom is by herself. And we also learn that everyone is living on this tiny parcel of land around them, and they were not being paid fairly. So a croft would be a small farm. When he opened the door each morning and looked out, he saw McTavish's house on top of a mountain, a magnificent stone mansion surrounded by red, pink, and violet rhododendrons. Gregor often climbed the slope and stood outside the iron gates, wondering what fine furnishings and delicious foods lay within. Neighbors claimed that McTavish owned many houses and even kept a chest of gems under his bed. As Gregor, his mother, and their neighbors grew gaunt and pale with hard work and not enough food, they rallied against McTavish, who had swindled all of them at one time or another. This would be their conflict. So the conflict would be Gregor and his neighbors versus McTavish, character versus character. You could say that McTavish is basically stealing from them and making them live in poverty, while he is hoarding wealth. And another word there that we had seen here would be swindled, is cheated or tricked. And also gaunt would just mean very, very skinny and like sickly. One day, as Gregor listened to the bagpipe music that drifted from the open windows of McTavish's mansion, he had an idea. That night, when his mother was asleep, he emptied the jug that held their money and counted it. After putting it back a few coins for food, he put the rest in his pocket. The next morning, he hurried to the market, where he went from farmer to farmer, asking the prices of sheep for sale. Gregor found many handsome animals, but they were all too expensive. When he reached a stall with a scrawny and sickly sheep, the owner beckoned to him. Gregor shook his head and began to walk away. The man grabbed his sleeve and whispered in his ear, "This one will make her owner rich." Gregor examined the old sheep with spindly legs and dirty, unkept wool. "The worst of the lot. If she will make me rich," said Gregor, "how is it that she has not done so for you?" The man paused, thinking, "I have not had her long enough." "Nonsense," said Gregor, but he gave the money. They gave the man his money and led the pitiful animal home. This is an interesting development here. We do not know why Gregor did this here, but we do know one of the words that beckoned would be to like call someone over to you, someone to come over. Either you could go like this, something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be saying someone to call you over, just motioning or calling them over. So now Gregor has an old sickly sheep, and he literally spent all him and his mom's money to get it. When his mother saw what he had bought with her money, she burst into tears. "My foolish son, what have you done? Now we will starve and no one will help us." "Do as I say, mother, and we will be rich, I promise." She wanted to believe him. Wiping her eyes with her ragged sleeve, she asked what he wanted her to do. "Go to the market and tell everyone that your son has a sheep that will make whoever owns her rich," said Gregor. One morning, a carriage arrived. Two servants opened the door, and a stout, well-dressed man emerged. His tartan kilt was made of the finest wool. His ascot was pure silk, and his shoes had silver buckles. On his fat fingers were 8 gold rings, and his pomaded hair glistened in the sun. It was McTavish. Stout would mean kind of like short and chubby. And then these would be his traditional Scottish clothing, because this would be a folktale. Gregor bowed as if to royalty. McTavish looked at him sternly. I have come to rid you of the unfortunate sheep that everyone is talking about, said McTavish, opening his sporran. I can pay your price and I will have her, even though she has done nothing for you, I see. McTavish sneered at Gregor. Gregor hugged Dear One. I will not sell her to you. At that, McTavish, whose servants were helping him to his carriage, turned and marched back. I will pay anything, he said. Name the price. Gregor was ready. That, he said, pointing up to the mansion above them. I will have the dwelling and everything in it, furniture, utensils, even the chest of gems under your bed. Done, said McTavish. The next day, Gregor and his mother moved into the mansion that had once belonged to McTavish, and McTavish brought Dear One to the market so that all might see he could indeed own anything he wanted. Then McTavish and the sheep rode away in his carriage to another of his houses in a valley beyond the mountains. After months had passed and the sheep had done nothing to increase McTavish's riches, he realized he had been swindled. Furious beyond speech, he returned to the mansion, but Gregor would not open the gates. I have been cheated, shouted McTavish. You have not been cheated, said Gregor. I was the owner of the sheep, and she has made me rich, hasn't she? Yes, but, sputtered McTavish. Then you got what you paid for. Gregor turned and walked away. Soon afterward, Gregor sold the chest of gems and bought the huge flock of sheep he and his mother had always wanted. He shared the rest of his fortune with the other poor families of the valley who had been cheated by McTavish. So this would be our ending here. And I could say our resolution builds our theme. If we're looking for a theme, we would ask ourselves, what did Gregor learn? Gregor would be our protagonist. We had Gregor versus the antagonist, McTavish. So when you're looking for a theme, you can ask yourself, what did the main character learn? You can also ask yourself, what did the antagonist learn? But in the case of McTavish, I don't know if McTavish actually learned anything. Well, we might say, if you are very, very greedy all the time, people will start to maybe plot against you and maybe end up winning. So in this case, McTavish's greed and his tendency to not be very nice to the people around him led him to be swindled, which he wasn't swindled too bad because he still has another house. So you could say the theme of this story is avoiding greediness in order to get along with your neighbors and your community, because in this case, they teamed up against him. You could also say the dangers of being too greedy can lead to loss, because in this case, we had McTavish. He went from quite wealthy, which he's still pretty much quite wealthy, but he definitely lost a decent amount of his fortune there with his losing his property. So that could be some themes here. And in the end, Gregor solved his conflict with McTavish by tricking him. So we could also say the sheep has a symbol in the story. We could say the sheep symbolizes Gregor's quick thinking and problem-solving abilities, because basically Gregor went out to the market to purposely buy this sheep. And then the reason McTavish even heard about the sheep was because Gregor told his mother to spread the rumor around the town. So that was another important development. I don't know if we caught on that, why McTavish went there at all, because Gregor's mother had told everyone that whoever owned that sheep would be rich. So the sheep represents Gregor's wit and resourcefulness and basically him doing this con on McTavish. But we don't really feel bad for McTavish because he was the story's villain, obviously. So now we would take however much you need to answer the questions that we have at the end of the story. All right, so we have our question 1. How do paragraphs 1 and 23 relate to each other? Now, if we look, they change Gregor's life during the story. They show what Gregor has learned. They show how McTavish changes. They show the growth of McTavish's fortune during the story. All right, well, it would be paragraph 1 is the very beginning, where they're in the valley, or the Highlands of in a valley in the Highlands of Scotland, And they were all suffering under this greedy landlord named McTavish. And then in the end, everyone is happy but McTavish. And Gregor has his sheep, and he's sharing it with everyone in his neighborhood. So if we go back, if we said they showed what Gregor has learned, this is what people get confused on a lot. Now, in the beginning, Gregor wasn't greedy, and he knew that being greedy was wrong. So technically, Gregor didn't learn anything. He did trick McTavish, but he started out knowing that greed was bad, and in the end, he's sharing with everyone, so he didn't turn into a greedy person. So it can't be B, because Gregor pretty much, he had the same values throughout the entire text, right? They show how McTavish changes. McTavish didn't exactly change. He was greedy in the beginning, and he was greedy and angry at the end. So he didn't really go through any change. Usually when you want to say a character went through change, they would have like a turnaround and stop being greedy or stop being mean or stop being a bully. They show the growth of McTavish's fortune. It can't be D, because McTavish's fortune was cut in half. So it would have to be A. It shows the change in Gregor's life. Gregor didn't technically change his personality or who he was. It was just a change in his life circumstance. He went from being extremely impoverished to living this life of luxury after the successful trick of McTavish. What does the phrase marched back in paragraph 14 suggest about McTavish? Confused, worried, determined, excited. This is going to be a tricky one because when we go back, marching back can kind of mean you can march back in many different ways, right? But in this sense, we know that after he's marching back, he says, I will pay anything, name the price. So if somebody said that while they were marching, I might think they're determined. Because if he says, I will pay anything, I will do anything, that means he is determined to have this sheep. He might have been excited to have it, but determined would definitely be the best term for this. All right, so we have C, determined. How are Gregor and the man who sold the sheep to him similar? This is a weird one. They are both unskilled at selling things to people. I might say that the guy that sold the sheep to Gregor was pretty good at selling things because Gregor bought it. And then Gregor, he got McTavish to buy it. So it can't be A. They both try to trick someone in order to make money. They didn't do that. They did do that. But let's see the other ones. They are both concerned with helping their family and neighbors. Gregor is, but we don't know if the man who sold the sheep is, so it can't be C. They both believe that animals can have special qualities. We're not exactly sure if the guy who sold him the sheep even thinks that. So for this one, and I don't think Gregor thought that the sheep had anything special going on either, so it can't be D. B. They both trick someone in order to make money. Which of Gregor's actions show how he is different from McTavish? Gregor cheats another person. Gregor buys a sickly sheep. Gregor shares his wealth. Gregor moves into a big house. We want how he's different. They both do cheat. Gregor kind of did cheat McTavish, but McTavish was cheating everybody. So can't be A, right? And because also we want different, right? It's different. And Gregor only cheated one person. Or McTavish was cheating everyone. Gregor does buy a sickly sheep, but so did McTavish, so it can't be B. The only way that I really see the biggest difference between Gregor and McTavish is when Gregor ends up back in McTavish's mansion, he shares his wealth. And that you could say is a theme, too. Or if we were talking about the themes, you could say Sharing wealth can lead to more happiness than hoarding wealth. Hoarding wealth is when you don't share anything. Which sentence is true about Gregor and McTavish? McTavish has a plan for how the sheep will make him rich, but Gregor does not. McTavish wants to own a big house and many jewels, but Gregor does not. Gregor wants to move away to another land, but McTavish does not. Gregor is generous with his family and his neighbors, but McTavish is not. I might say it has to be this one, because Gregor is generous, but McTavish was most certainly not. And McTavish didn't have any plan for how the sheep was going to make him rich. Gregor did. He was going to trick McTavish. That was Gregor's plan. McTavish wants to own big houses and jewelry. Gregor does not. This isn't technically true, because Gregor does want to have the big house, and he did ask for McTavish's jewels. But the purpose of it wasn't to just be hoard all the wealth and not share it. He was going to share it with everyone. Gregor didn't want to move, and McTavish didn't really seem like he wanted to move either. So for this one, it's got to be D. Sentence expresses the theme. Big losses can come from being greedy. Family can make hard times easier. Wealth may come from hard work. Appreciating others can lead to happiness. See, this one can be tricky because two of these themes are very true, but only one is the best one. Because you could really say, Gregor's mom did make his times easier. Like were sharing money together and whatnot. But for this one, this is definitely a story about greed. Being greedy can lead to big losses. Which detail would be most important to include in a summary of the story? So for these types of questions, you would have to say, if you took one of these sentences out, would the story still follow the same plot? Gregor goes to the market and talks to many farmers about their sheep. He does do that, but I don't know if that's the most important thing to include. Gregor's mother is asleep when Gregor takes money to buy the sheep. That did happen. McTavish lives at another one of his houses after he buys a sheep from Gregor. He did, but we don't really care where McTavish lives, right? McTavish goes to buy Gregor's sheep after he hears rumors about the animal. Now, if we took this out, if Gregor's mom was awake when he left, she might have yelled at him, but he probably would have done the same thing, right? So if she didn't stop him, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the story, right? This one, him talking to the farmers, he really only talked to the one farmer about the one sheep when he beckoned him over. So this one's technically not even true. C, McTavish lives at one of his houses. That is true, but doesn't matter. Now with this one, if McTavish didn't hear the rumor and didn't go to the market that day, we would not have had the outcome that we had. If McTavish didn't hear the rumor, then Gregor would have just been stuck with the sickly sheep. So McTavish hearing the rumor that Gregor's mom spread is very important to the story summary. That has to happen for the story to make sense. So try to ask yourself when you get these questions, what is the most important detail what is the most important to include in a summary? You want to make sure you're looking for, if I took this event out, would the story possibly lose its entire plot? And in the case of this question, 21, D has to be our choice. If McTavish didn't go to buy the sheep, then Gregor wouldn't have sold the sheep and he would have been in some trouble, right? So this is one of my favorite stories, a folktale. And a folktale just tells a cultural significance about a region or place. So in this one, it would have been about greedy landlords taking from the Scottish people, I guess you could say, if it goes back that far. But this would be a short story for grades 4 and 5. And this is from Striving Students Towards Success. If you enjoy this content, You can subscribe and leave a comment for more grade levels and content.